Hello, Dr. Alexander. Hope you're doing well.
Yes, I am. Thank you. I hope you, Pierre Mudassir, sir, well too.
Yeah, Alhamdulillah, I'm doing good. The
It's a
topic is,
great, yeah, it's a great
yeah,
pleasure and privilege to talk to you on the day of the Prophet's birthday.
yeah, that's that's right. Thank you. Thank you. It is very special day, undoubtedly. So, and by the way, there is an unfortunate incident took place today, I guess, in Paris. And there were some worshippers were killed in a church. I have not gone through the details, but I guess this is an act of terrorism, and some fanatics who doesn't know the value of life, and they are just becoming, uh, I guess, a global problem now. It is already a global problem. The extremism and terrorism is a global problem which we all are facing. And today's topic is about the conflict of Muslims uh, in Cox.
In the North Caucasus, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like, this terrorist accident took place in Nice in France, in southern France today. Yeah, it's very unfortunate. My talk is to some extent related to certain
Mm.
aspects of activities within the Muslim community that might result in acts of intimidation and terror. Uh, and I would like to show you the presentation. I
Yeah.
hope it will appear on your screen. Um,
I'm also working with that. I'm also working with that presentation.
yes.
How is until we figure out with the presentation, how is situation with the coronavirus and the election virus there in America?
Well, it's hard to say. In terms of election, we don't hear anything but the positions of the two candidates and their supporters and opponents. So it's
Mm,
become a daily routine. Sometimes you are afraid to turn on the TV because you
mm,
get tired of being bombarded with the views of from both sides. So and incessant advertisement in favor of one or the other candidate. So that's what we see,
mhm,
unfortunately. Um, and some people are just looking forward to the end of this election marathon and getting back to normal, at least in terms of the TV program and radio program. Um, but as for the coronavirus, yes, there is a considerable upsurge in my state, Michigan, and in the Midwest of the United States in general. So uh, it's overwhelming, and it looks like the authorities are not prepared yet
mm.
for that eventuality. Can you see my presentation now?
Yeah, it is opening. Uh, the system is because it is multitasking with different software, so it is bit slow, but it is opening.
Mhm.
And as soon as it will open, I will share it on screen.
Okay, excellent. So I'll be asking you to flip the slides if you don't mind.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. And I guess it. I will disappear from the screen, but I will be hearing you very well. So when you will
You,
ask me to flip the slide, I will follow the command.
but I now can see this slideshow. You don't
Yeah,
see it.
now it is there. Now it is there.
Okay,
So
excellent.
you can share it. Like let me do it.
Yeah, I can move it. Yeah,
Now you can share it
yes, I
on the
can.
screen.
Um, so I would like to thank the Pakistani chapter of the Universal Sufi Council and its president, Sayyid Mudassir Nazar Shah, for inviting me to speak on the day of the Prophet's birthday, which is a great. Um, Unfortunately, as you all know, there's no peace within the Muslim community. There are still conflicts, tensions among different groups, vying for ideological supremacy, for domination. And there are many groups that want their voices to be heard by everyone. And of course, as usual, each faction, each group, each community thinks that it is in the possession of the ultimate truth. My task as a scholar is not to say what is normative, what is normal, what is abnormal. I would like simply to share with you my academic research on a clash of Islams. I take one particular case, Sufism and Salafism in the North Caucasus. Um, the North Caucasus is the area between the Caspian and Black Sea in what today is the Russian Federation. I prefer to call Russia the Russian Federation because it is a federation of many different ethnicities, ethnic groups, nationalities. So it would be more appropriate than just to say Russia, because many of my students in St. Petersburg University, I teach them online, are actually representatives of various Muslim communities. Some are children of migrants from Central Asia. Others come from the North Caucasus, which will be the topic of our today's discussion. And there are also students of Tatar and Bashkir background. These are two very deeply integrated Muslim communities living in the Volga region of the Russian Federation. So on the screen, you can see my affiliation. I'm a professor of Islamic Studies at the Department of Middle East Studies, University of Michigan, and I'm also a project director at St. Petersburg State University in Russia. Because I lived and I was born in Russia, Islam in Russia is like a personal interest of mine. So, and like I would like, as I said at the beginning, to share some of my observations on what's going on in the southern republics of Russia, in this particular case in the North Caucasus. I'll begin with a slide which shows us a dance of the Qadiri Sufis in Ingushetia, a Muslim republic in the North Caucasus of the Russian Federation. We all know that Islam is liable to a great variety of uses, rhetorical uses and practical uses. And there are fissures and rifts within the Muslim community over what Islam means for a certain group of people and how it should be implemented in real life. I will focus today on the rift between the Salafis, that is, the followers of the pious ancestors or forebears of Islam, as-Salaf, as-Salih in Arabic, or as-Salaf, as-Salihun. There are both versions are in use. And this term Salafis is usually translated into English as fundamentalists. Many scholars think it's not a very accurate description. Some prefer to speak about Muslim conservatives. Others say they're radicals. But the group of Salafis is very diverse internally. And so are the Sufis, they're opponents of the Salafis, the ascetics, mystics of Islam. And the tensions between these two groups begin rather early. Already in the 14th, 13th century, we find criticism of Sufism on the part of certain fuqaha, that is, legal scholars. The most prominent critics of Sufism are Ibn al-Jawzi, who died in 1201, who lived in Baghdad and was a major preacher. He wrote a book, Delusions of the Devil, in which he describes how the devil deludes Sufis. But what is interesting is Ibn al-Jawzi was also a collector of Sufi biographies, and he thought that the early Sufis were very loyal to the word of God, to the Quran and the Sunnah, and he praised them in these biographies. At the same time, he criticized his contemporaries for what he considered to be excesses, excessive asceticism, excessive preoccupation with purity, mixing of men and women during Sufi gatherings, and also the practices of dhikr, ecstatic dhikr and Sufi dances that you see here in the slide. As this Sufi dances, that the dance that you observe is characteristic of the Qadiriya Sufi order, founded by Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, who died in 1166 in Baghdad, and who gave birth to a very widely spread, actually global brotherhood called the Qadiriya, which can be found from China all the way to West Africa. So the other critic was Ibn Taymiyyah, of whom many of us have heard, everyone has heard about Ibn Taymiyyah, who is interested in Islam, who lived in Damascus and who died in 1328, Common Era. And Ibn Taymiyyah criticized Sufism not only for their practices like dances or visiting shrines of Sufi masters, but he also criticized Sufi philosophy. In particular, he criticized Ibn Arabi and his followers such as At-Tilimsani, Sadr ad-Din al-Qunawi, and Ibn Saba'in. So if we look at this evidence from the Middle Ages, and also if we consider contemporary rift between conflicts between Sufis and Salafis, we can come to a conclusion that this is an eternal conflict, and there is no end to it, and that it cannot be resolved. But my point here is that in each area where we observe the conflict, it is driven by the local factors, which I would like to examine in my presentation today. So, as you may have heard about the wars in Chechnya between Russians and the local supporters of the Russian federal government, and the separatist movement insurgency that originally was ethnic-based. It was the Chechens wanted to liberate themselves from the embrace of the Soviet Empire and then the Russian Federation as a autonomous region in the North Caucasus. It wanted independence from Russia. And it was a national liberation struggle that eventually acquired the Islamic undertones and eventually became an Islamic movement altogether. And I'll explain why from an ethnic nationalist struggle, it transformed itself into an Islam-based movement. Here on the map, you can see in Russian saying Imarat Kavkaz, that emirate, the Caucasus. And as you could see, it stretches from the Caspian Sea here on the right to the Black Sea. At least in this imaginary universe of the creators of the North Caucasus emirate, that was their map. They wanted to take control of these vast territories and institute the rule of the divine law, the Sharia, as they understood it. The birth of the new the Caucasus Emirate, the new Sharia state in the North Caucasus, goes back to October, to late October, October the 30th, I think, or 31st of 2007. Here you can see the leader of the resistance, a field commander, the Chechen resistance against Russian domination of the Caucasus. His name is Dokko Umarov. He was a student in the Oil and Petrol Institute, who later became a major figure, a leader of the insurgency against the Russian federal authorities, and who participated actively in the Chechen struggle for independence from Russia in 1994, 1996, and then later in 1999 through 2001. Now, in 2007, after the insurgency suffered several setbacks, he decided to reinvent the movement from a nationalist separatist movement to an Islamic movement, and he renamed the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, that was the original name of this breakaway republic, the Chechen Republic. It now acquired a new name. It became the Caucasus Emirate. And in Russian, it's Imarat Kavkaz, or Imarat al-Kaukaz in Arabic. Umarov becomes the leader of the Caucasus Emirate, and as you can see here on the slide, it's the main raison d'etre of the movement is jihad. Jihad is the means of legitimizing the movement. It is no longer the struggle of ethnic Chechens against Russians and their local allies. It is now a struggle between Christianity and Islam, or rather, as Umarov puts it, it's a struggle between the infidels, the Russians, and their local supporters, whom he calls murtads. I'll talk more about them. Murtads are apostates, and the mujahideen, the fighters for of holy war, of jihad. So who is the enemy? Now the enemy is redefined from the Russian state to taghut. Taghut in Arabic means, it originally, the term means to overflow the coast, or to spill over, but it means simply the excess. That's something that violates the established borders of propriety. But in the rhetoric of Umarov and other leaders of the Caucasus Emirate, it became the name for man-made laws according to which the Chechens were forced to live under Russian rule. So he declares that as Amir of Mujahideen, that is the fighters of jihad, I reject everything associated with taghut, which he describes as in Russian as idolatry, idolopoklonnichestvo. I reject all kafir or infidel laws established in the world. I reject all laws and systems established by the infidels in the lands of the Caucasus. I reject and declare outlawed all the names used by infidels to divide Muslims. He even gives new names to various parts of the Russian Federation that have Muslim population. He calls the Volga region Itil-Ural region. He calls Ingushetia the Vilayat Galgay-Cho. Ossetia, it's a republic in the North Caucasus. He calls Iriston. The capital city of Chechnya, Grozny, it's the Russian name, which means menacing, is now renamed Johar after the first now late president of Chechnya. And the Chechens are called Nakhcho. So even as you see, the names are changed to reflect the vision of the world by the leaders of the Caucasus Emirate. They are reluctant to use Russian toponyms, Russian geographical and ethnic names for the populations and regions of the Russian Federation. So for Umarov and his followers, who constitute the core of the leadership of the Caucasus Emirate, their struggle in the Caucasus is no longer a national struggle for independence from Russia. It is now a part of the global jihad against forces of evil, the tagut, the idolatry that dominates the world and that subjugates Muslims. So he sees Sufism, now Sufism comes into the picture, as a divisive factor, because each group of Sufis follow their own leader. Therefore, they cannot unite because each group is reluctant to recognize that the other leaders. Therefore, from the viewpoint of the Muslim struggle, Sufism is a factor of division, not unity. The factor of unity is described as Sharia, that is the implementation of the Islamic law, before which everyone is equal. There cannot be no peers, no sheikhs, no ustad. We are all Muslims and equal in the eyes of God. This is the major ideologist of the Caucasus Emirate. His name is Mouladi Udugov. He's now in hiding. No one knows where he lives. He may be in Turkey. He may be in the United Arab Emirates. We don't know really, but he was a former Komsomol leader. That is, he was the communist functionary. Komsomol means the Young Communist League. And he used to be a leader, and later he reinvented himself as the Minister of Information of the now abolished Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. After the name Ichkeria was abolished, he became the ideologist for the jihad waged by the Caucasus Emirate. He describes Chechen nationalism as the stooges of the West. Why? Because they adopted the infidel legal system and in the hopes of using it to wrench independence of Chechnya from Russia. But he thinks they are misguided, that the only law that will liberate Muslim is the Sharia. Those who cooperate with Moscow, with Putin, are apostates in his view. And Chechnya under Russian rule is an apostate state that should be abolished and fought against. He makes many interesting statements, provocative statements in his declaration of the establishment of the Emirate of the Caucasus Emirate. He refers to the pious ancestors of Islam, as-Salaf as-Salih, and therefore he can be seen as the proponent of Salafism in its Caucasus version, in its Chechen version. Those nationalists who placed their hopes on the international tribunal in Strasbourg were mistaken, according to Udugov. Only Islam can liberate the Chechens of the Caucasus, the Muslims of the Caucasus in general, from the Russian yoke. And he ends his declaration, one of his declarations, by saying, Islam indeed is a religion of peace, but only when it is in power. So Udugov's ideas fell on fertile ground. You can see an inscription spray painted on one of the walls of the capital city of Dagestan, Makhachkala. Dagestan is a republic, Muslim republic, very devout republic actually in terms of Islam, one of the earliest to adopt Islam. Dagestanis are adopted Islam very early, in the 7th century already, and in the early 8th century. So they take pride in their primacy as one of the few people of the former Soviet Union who had embraced Islam very early. The inscription spray painted on the wall says, our goal is to establish the Sharia, the Shariat in Russian. The ideas of the leaders of the Caucasus Emirate can be traced back to the writings of the Egyptian ideologist of the Muslim Brotherhood, Sayyid Qutb, who was executed by the Nasser's regime in 1966, and the Indian Pakistani Muslim leader who is well known to all of you, probably Abul Ala Maududi, who died in 1979 in the United States in Buffalo. And the idea, the principal idea is the a rigid division between what Abul Ala Maududi and Sayyid Qutb called a Jahiliyyah, that is the state of ignorance, pre-Islamic idolatry that now rules the world, and that should be replaced by a Hakimiyyah. The Hakimiyyah means the rule of God, from the Arabic hakama, to rule. And the terminology they used, recognizably Salafi-Wahhabi, I would even say, for instance, they say kufr at-tawhid, which means the rejection, the compromising of the principle of unity and uniqueness of God by worshipping other objects and individuals. Kufr al-wala, for instance, the taking as your friends non-Muslims or those who oppress Muslims among the Muslims. They also use the terms bid'ah, which means illegitimate, non-Sharia innovation in religion, shirk, polytheism, and so forth. So, in other words, the rhetoric of the leaders of the Emirate, Udugov and Dumarov, is recognizably, I would say, Salafi, meaning Salafi in, if we take Salafism as the ideology of resistance to the non-Islamic rule, with the goal of establishing the Sharia in a certain land. For instance, Qutb wanted to establish the Sharia as the law of Egypt, the principal law of Egypt. Abul Ala Maududi wanted to establish the rule of Sharia in first in India and then in Pakistan after the separation of the two countries. So the Sharia, or pure Islam, dichotomy that is advanced by the ideologist of the Caucasus Emirate is divides the world into two groups. One group is the Mujahideen, those Muslims who so Mujahideen are those who fight, who struggle to establish, against forces of evil, to establish a Sharia state, a state ruled by the Sharia, by the divine law, and a state based on the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. Those Muslims who refuse to join the Mujahideen and who live by the customs of Taghut and Jahiliyyah, that is idolatry, ignorance, they are called murtads by the founders of the Caucasus Emirate, literally meaning apostates. So for the Mujahideen of Chechnya and Dagestan and other republics of the North Caucasus, the pro-Russian president of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, whom you can see here, he holds a golden gun, a man with a golden gun, is a personal friend of Putin. He is a poster boy for the worst type of murtad or apostate. So a person who rejected the jihad against the Russian infidels and joined their ranks. So he is an apostate and an enemy of the Ummah. But Mujahideen also have to be distinguished from the hypocrites. The hypocrites on this slide are depicted on the left. They browse books in the Muslim library. This you can see huge sets of volumes of hadith, of aqidah, the theological doctrine of Islam, of Quran tafsir, of Quran commentaries. So they browse the books, they read the books, but they refuse to join the ranks of the Mujahideen who fight against the dominance of Jahiliyyah in the world, the dominance of Taghut, non-Islamic laws. So they are poor Muslims, as opposed to the Muslims on the right who leave their houses, leave their families behind, and go into the mountains to fight against the murtads, that is the Muslim apostates who become non-Muslim actually, and against the their Russian protectors. Those individuals on the left browsing in the library are called munafiqs, the hypocrites. So you can now see how the world is divided into four groups. The Mujahideen, that is the true Muslims who pursue the jihad. The kuffar, that is non-believers who fail to recognize the primacy of Islam as the final revelation of God to the Muslim Ummah. The apostates who by their actions detached themselves from the Muslim community and became renegades. And munafiqs, those who hover between these two poles. They're neither on the one side nor on the other, but prefer to hide their heads in the sand like those individuals on the left portrayed here. So the propaganda of the Caucasus Emirate describes the world as a dark image filled as two realms. The one realm is a dark image filled with idolatry, infidelity, sedition, injustice, outrage, and immorality. On the other part of the world is the realm of the bright sunlight of faith, true religion, piety, and virtue, under whose flag the monotheistic Mujahid youth are prominent. This is a quote from Abdulaziz al-Muqrin, who was actually a Saudi ideologist for jihad. He was killed in a shootout with the Saudi security forces about 10 years ago. Now you can see again a group of Sufis from the North Caucasus. This photographs definitely would enrage any Salafi because it portrays people with drums who moreover use them to conduct their sessions of dhikr, and who also use the drums to for dances, Sufi dances of the Qadiriya. You saw the image of the Qadiriya dance at the beginning. This is again Ingushetia, a republic which is close to Chechnya, borders on Chechnya, and they speak similar languages, but ethnically they are traced, their genealogies to different progenitors, so to say. They're very closely related, but still separate, and they even have their own republics. Chechen Republic and Ingush Republic. So both republics advocate Sufism as the traditional Islam, and they cooperate with the pro-Russian authorities of the republics. So for Mujahideen, who of course are arch enemies of the pro-Russian leadership of these republics, Sufis are a pack of dogs of hell. That's, I'm using their quote unquote, their abuse in the propaganda materials of the Caucasus Emirate, who are in the service of the kuffar and murtads. And rank and file Sufis are described as blind kittens in the lap of their Sufi masters, because they follow them, their masters blindly and unquestionably, whereas they should follow only the Prophet and the Sharia and the Quran. So goes their argument. An interesting symbiosis of Sufism and local state structure can be found in Dagestan and in Chechnya. So the leadership of this republic, of these republics who have abandoned any hope of separating themselves from Russia, they decided to support Sufis over against their more activist opponents. You can see here one of the Naqshbandi Shadili sheikhs. Naqshbandi and Shadiliya are the two major Sufi communities. Shadili is spread in North Africa, but it also has its branches as far as in Indonesia, for instance, and West Africa. So the local Sufi sheikh was Said Apandi, who was a kind of kingmaker. He's portrayed here with a traditional Dagestani dagger, a Sufi in arms, who his murids were occupied very major positions of power in the Republic of Dagestan, and also in the Republic of Chechnya. There were different leaders. The Sufis in Chechnya, the official Sufi order is the Qadiriya order. I mentioned the name Ramzan Kadyrov. His very name tells us that he and his father, who was killed by the rebels, by the insurgents, were the members of the Qadiriya Sufi Brotherhood. Said Apandi represented the Naqshbandi Shadili tradition, silsila, that also was occupied the dominant position in the spiritual directory of today's Republic of Dagestan. Two different patterns of interaction between Sufi leaders and the state. What I've just said might give you an impression that Sufis was always docile and prone to cooperate with state authorities, no matter what. This is a very incorrect perception. Historically, Sufism was a vehicle of resistance to colonization of the Muslim country. If we take this particular case, the North Caucasus, we'll find out that Shamwil, who is usually called Shamil for some reason, he always signed his letters as Shamwil, that is Samuel. He was an Avar, that is Dagestani, leader of the rebellion against the Russian conquest of the North Caucasus. He managed to create a state entity that came to be known as the Imamate of Shamil. And he was a member of the Naqshbandiya Sufi order, who presided over resistance, indicating that under certain conditions, Sufism can serve as a vehicle and also an ideological justification for jihad. The local jihad movement was called Ghazawat, from the Arabic ghazw, which means a raid against non-Muslims. Here we find in the North Caucasus descendants of Shamil who also practice local jihad against Russians. Their names appear on the slide. Abdurrahman al-Sughuri, who died in 1882, a leader of rebellion, he and his son. And then, but at the same time, we find within the same Naqshbandi Brotherhood, we find a peaceful branch that was led by Mahmud al-Amali, who died in 1877, and who preached peace with the Russians and encouraged internal jihad, the jihad of the soul, which is probably familiar to you, that ridding the soul of its evil desires and intentions and appetites. His successor, the popular Sheikh Saifullah Qadi, who died in 1920, consistently demonstrated restraint and even docility vis-a-vis the Russian state authority in the region and occasionally cooperated with them. So here you see, again, a Chechen gathering of Sufis in today's Chechnya. And these are the elders of the same community performing a vocal dhikr, the Qadri dhikr. Eventually, the peaceful pacifist branch of the Naqshbandiya and Qadiriya triumphed in Ingushetia and Dagestan. As you can see, those who practice and preach peaceful Sufism can find historical precedents in Mahmud al-Amali and Saifullah Qadi. And they can say Sufism is peaceful, it encourages cooperation with existing authority, as long as they do not prevent Muslims from performing their religious duties. That was exactly what the Qadiri Sheikhs Kunta Khaji, Mahmud al-Amali, and Saifullah Qadi preached. They preached peace with the authorities as long as the Muslims are allowed to perform their Quranic duties and Sunnatic duties. So we now see another group. These are non-peaceful Salafis, and who criticize Sufism for their accommodation of Russian rule, for their peaceful coexistence with the infidel Jahili rule of the Russian state and its local supporters such as Kadyrov. Because the presence of pro-Sufi scholars in the religious and state structure of Dagestan, which I described earlier, it is hardly surprising that the new Muslims, some of them were very secular, but then became born-again Muslims after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the resurgence of Islam. These new Muslims, or born-again Muslims, wanted to get independence from Russia, and they opposed the rule of the pro-Russian elite of their republic. So they decided to adopt the ideology that is opposite to Sufism, the Salafism-Wahhabism. And they accentuated their difference by putting on special clothing, observing special dress code for men and women, women were fully covered with burqa, with face mask, and even wore black gloves, as the women in Saudi Arabia and some Gulf states do. And that was associated with the authentic Arabian Islam that was actually alien to the Sufi-based Islam of the local communities. Sufism becomes the major target for Salafi critics of the rebels. Here you can see the rebels preaching the Quran in the woods, hiding in the woods. One of them holds the finger, which exemplifies or symbolizes Tawheed, the unity of God, and actually preaching against Sufism. One of the leaders of the Dagestani Salafis, who are styled Wahhabis in the Russian media, has counted 100 points on which Sufis deviate, according to his interpretation of Islam, from the teachings of the Prophet and his successors. He has written several books on the subject, including The Face of Sufism, in Russian, Лицо Суфизма. So what are the practical implications? They are very, very prominent. The Sufis and Salafis do not intermarry. They do not socialize. They pray in different mosques. They observe the same. They do not observe the same holidays. For instance, the Salafis refuse to observe the birthday of the Prophet, which is celebrated today by a great number of Muslims across the world. They do not attend each other's funerals. I'm moving on to the conclusions of my presentations. I have a lot to say about why Salafism and Sufism became the ideology and the preferred idiom for the expression of aspirations of the local Muslims. But I think I would like to save some time for questions if there are questions, and time is short, so I will go straight to contemporary Chechnya. Over the past decade and a half already, Chechnya, which was a hotbed of conflict in Putin's Russia, since the invasion of Chechnya by the Russian Federal Forces in 1994, it's been a hotbed of rebellion, of insurgency against the Russian federal state, during which the local freedom fighters, as they were described originally by the West, tried to wrench independence from Russia and assert an independent Chechen state. Then there was a transformation of this national liberation struggle into Islamic-based struggle, with Islam serving as the major form of justification and expression of the grievances of the local communities. Kadyrov made a bold step. After his father was killed by the insurgents, he pledged to avenge himself, and he turned against the leaders of the resistance movement. With the help of the Russian federal state, he suppressed the rebellion. He won over his former enemies. Many came to his side and joined his army, and now he rules Chechnya with an iron fist in the name of Sufi Islam. In particular, the Qadiriya order is propagated. Here you can see the Qadiri elders, and behind them the portrait of the young leader of the Chechen state. Any alternative to Sufi Islam is seen as militancy and extremism, and described as Wahhabism. Again, this is Kadyrov. You can see here, this is the huge portrait of his father, which is, of course, very un-Islamic from the viewpoint of the Salafis. you're not supposed to have these portraits so prominently displayed. It's against the portrayal of human beings, one of the injunctions of the Quran and the Sunnah. But this doesn't bother Kadyrov, who says that Sufi Islam is flexible. It keeps pace with time and changes with time. And he even arranged several fatwas condemning those who disagree with him within Chechnya, and also the Tatar leadership of the spiritual board of the Russian Federation of being Salafi and being extremist. He managed to have these legal rulings signed by many religious authorities from across the Muslim world, from Al-Azhar in Cairo, from Yemen, and so forth. The fatwas condemned those who disagreed with the Sufi interpretation of Islam as being deluded, dallin, that's those who have gone astray. So the conclusions now, quick wrap up of my discussion. What is abundantly clear that Sufism, whatever phenomena and characteristic this notion may comprise in each particular case, is deeply embedded in the history, culture, social and local, and social and power relations of concrete Muslim societies. It cannot be extricated from them. Sufism cannot be properly understood in isolation from the social political environment and historical precedents that are present in a given area. At the same time, Sufism, at least in the minds of the majority of social and political actors, is sufficiently distinct from non-Sufi versions of Islam, and therefore we scholars can use it as an analytic category. What I'm trying to say here, that some scholars say Sufism has become a name for everything that is different from the Sharia-based Islam. But based on my research, I think Sufism is not just a catch-all term, a category, but a helpful category in the analysis of the processes that we observe in the Muslim communities. Second group of conclusion. In the North Caucasus, we find societies in transition. Very traumatic collapse of the communist ideology and strict political control from Moscow resulted in a greater ideological openness and pluralism that and this pluralism and ideological openness compared to the communist period have resulted in the revival of Islam in its local but also in its imported forms, the so-called Salafism or Arabian Islam. These conditions are characterized by the presence of new options, which some Western researchers, for instance, the French scholar Olivier Roy, have described as a religion market, with its rule of circulation, export, import, exchange, standardization, marketing of the product for global consumption. In this market, there is a demand for both Sufism and Salafi-Wahhabism, which inevitably leads to the competition of these two interpretations of Islam for the hearts and minds of potential followers. Conclusions 3. Rival parties promote distinctive, even incompatible religious visions, agendas, and identities, appealing to the pristine purity and authenticity of Islam as represented by its pious ancestors and forebears. Both agree that the Salaf as-Salih are the models to be followed. However, they interpret the actions and the sayings of as-Salaf as-Salih, the pious ancestors of Islam, very differently. The Salaf as-Salih of Sufis include Sufi sheikhs of the past, the great Sufi authorities, beginning with Hassan al-Basri and later representatives Sufyan al-Thawri, then Dhunnun al-Misri, Rabi al-Adawiya, Fudail ibn Iyad, um, Haris al-Muhasibi, al-Junayd, and so forth. So these Sufis include this in the concept of Salaf al-Salih. And of course, the Salafis exclude them, saying these are illegitimate additions to the category. Their pious ancestors are Sahaba, that is, the companions of the Prophet. First and foremost, the Prophet and his closest companions. And the final couple of slides, the majority of Sufism's critics belong to the younger generation in the North Caucasus. While on the face of it, the youth attack what they call Sufism or traditional Islam, these two categories are rhetorically confused, rightly or wrongly, for its departure from the pristine, authentic Islam of the pious ancestor. They are, in fact, the youth are driven by a conscious or unconscious desire to liberate themselves from the entrenched local structures of power, loyalty, and authority. In the North Caucasus, this structure is represented by the official Muslim scholars who are usually affiliated with or derive their authority from a Sufi silsila. The local word for Sufi silsila is wird, that is the prayer that is used in that particular Sufi group as the way of worshiping God. Seen from that perspective, Sufism is a kind of straw man behind whom there lurk deeper grievances, especially discontent with the political, social, cultural, and economic status quo. In addition to their desire to break away from the traditional established networks of kinship and patronage, the Chechen and Dagestani Salafis, Wahhabis consider the reimagined Islam of the Salafis to be better suited for their ultimate goal, to join the imaginary global Ummah, unencumbered by the parochial conventions, customs, rituals, and loyalties of their homeland. In forging and promoting the notion of a transcendent transnational Islam, the Salafis of the Caucasus have acquired a powerful idiom to express their dissatisfaction with a status quo that has traditionally favored the older generation while demanding unquestionable obedience of the younger one. I will stop here, and if there are any questions from the audience or from the Professor Saluk Mudassir, I will be happy to answer it.
First of all, thank you very much, Professor Alexander, for this enlightening presentation about the Caucasus and the Sufi Salafi traditional conflict, which was there, which is still there. But one thing was great to learn that from Shamil to Ramzan, at least Sufis they evolve. They evolve from fighting to gain power through politics and making alliance with the ruling party of Russia. Now they are more political, and this is a positive thing that one is not stuck on a point, but they are learning how to live with the changes and the modern times requirement. This is wonderful to know. It was it was a great learning for me. I was not personally, I did not know about this much Sufism is there in Caucasus, and I was just fascinated during your presentation, and I was kind of willing to fly in those zones of Qadriya, Naqshbandiya, Shazliya, meeting them, joining them during their zikr sermons, joining them during their celebrations of Milad or Urs. So that's my on personal level. I felt too connected with them. Thank you for your presentation.
If I
And
may add, you are
yeah,
absolutely right, sir, because Sufism's strength is its ability to adapt to changing condition. That's its major strength, and I think it will assure its survival for a very long time, indefinitely, I would say, because it is very flexible and responsive to the needs of the society in which it is embedded.
I agree. I agree. And one thing which I was there, you mentioned that uh, there are two things going same time. Sufism is under attack by Salafis, and there is a situation where Dagestan and especially Chechnya are kind of promoting Sufism on state level. So these two things parallel gaining same pace, I guess. What is the solution? How this rift will end up?
You mean is there a possibility for reconciliation?
I don't believe there would be a possibility of reconciliation between Sufis and Salafis. Both are on different extremes. Uh, how the situation will become normal?
Well, today in the Russian Federation, I think in your society it might be different. So I do not want to extrapolate what I found on the ground in Chechnya and Dagestan and the North Caucasus in general. I don't want to extrapolate this situation onto other parts of the world. Uh, Today, I think the religious authorities in Russia are also divided. For instance, the current mufti of the Russian Federation, the chief religious authority of the entire Russia, is at loggerheads with Kadyrov over interpretation of Islam. Because Kadyrov insists that the Sufism is the only correct Islam. There can be no other truth. He cites, I was surprised that he and his mufti, his own Majidov, the mufti of Chechnya, they cite the classical Sufi individuals, the models of Sufi behavior, like a Junaid in particular. They say that Junaid represents the sober Sufism that we should imitate. The religious authority is based in Moscow. Their names are Gainuddin, it's Ainuddin in Arabic, and his right-hand person, Damir Muhiddinov. They represent a Jadidi approach. They want a revival. And they often see Sufism as a thing of the past. So therefore, Kadyrov and their leadership, the young Turks who run the Russian academic, religious establishment, the Muslims, they have sharp disagreements over what it means to be Muslim in a secular country like Russia, what it means, how one can preserve one's identity while being modern. For Kadyrov, he takes a more conservative stance. He thinks that Sufism is a way to conserve the way of life that is so dear to the Chechens, to preserve the traditional morality and ethics of the society. Whereas Damir Muhiddinov and Gainuddin, the chief religious authority of the Russian Federation, they do not directly criticize Sufism. They would even emphasize that Sufism was part and parcel of the liberation struggle against the Russian colonial rule. But they think that it should be practiced in private, by individuals, and that the best model is the Tatar and Bashkir Jadids, those
mm,
who said that religious education should be reformed along European lines. That is,
mm,
that mathematics,
mm,
geometry, astronomy all have to be part of the curriculum, even in
mm,
madrasas.
mm,
Uh, and they also send, it's a new development, they also send the best and the brightest representatives of young Muslim generation to secular institution for training in history, culture, Islamic studies from the secular viewpoint.
mm,
Kadyrov's Kadyrov's Chechen students also go to secular institutions, but as private individuals. Yeah, they're not supported directly by the republic. Whereas the leadership of the Russian Federation uses its financial resources to fund the rather expensive education in Moscow and St. Petersburg universities for the students. So it means it is a deliberate choice. I don't know what you think about this arrangement, but that's what we observe today. We see disagreements over how the place of Sufism in the modern world, that the reformers want it to be private, low key, within the privacy of one's apartments or houses, whereas Kadyrov wants it to be public and
mm,
to determine the behavior of people in the public sphere, at least in his republic.
mm. I guess three strengths of Sufi communities all over the world are the real strengths. One, that they are very much decentralized communities, which you mentioned in your presentation as well. This is a real core strength of Sufi communities. Uh, the second is that they now, with the time, they have learned how to live with uh, diversity, how to accept diversity. So they are very compatible with diversity. That is a second strength. And I think the core strength of Sufi community is that they know how to agree to disagree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So these three core strengths are uh, very important for Sufi communities all over the globe. And this is what synchronized them with the modern day's needs, and with the disagreements they still can live together, they can have agreement on disagreement,
Yes.
and they don't go in armed conflict in, in modern day. I'm not talking about the past, but in modern day, Sufis mostly avoid the armed conflict, and they adopt the political ways and means to advocate their viewpoint, to gain space, to gain power. And I guess in this modern time, these are the practical and positive approaches. And I would love to thank you, Dr. Alexander, for giving us time. I know that you have a busy schedule. And again, I would love to have one more session whenever you find the time, whenever you feel comfortable. Uh, we would like to host you in this podcast. And um, for us, this is a great learning opportunity. For us, it is a great learning opportunity. And I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that you are providing us this opportunity.
Thank you. Let's correspond and decide maybe on the date later, because I'm not ready. I have to see my calendar and my commitments. I would like to thank you and your center yeah, very much for hosting me. I'm always very happy and elated even to speak to Sufi audiences. but I cannot ignore their opponents, so I try to live between two worlds. I hear the criticism from both sides, but also I see that there are also affinities between the Salafis and the Sufis, which they do not want to recognize. But yes, there are some affinities. It's a subject of a separate study. At some point, we may discuss this as well. Thank you so much, Pierre Mudassir, and thank you for from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.